is hookup culture supreme amongst young people? The people that you see, are people hooking up all over the place?
I think it is. I think there's a lot of lore, right? I think every generation sort of thinks the generation that came after them was kind of off the
Oh,
rails.
yeah.
So in the data, last year, Kate Julian wrote this beautiful piece for The Atlantic called The Sex Recession. And the data indicates that young adults actually may be a bit more reclusive and fearful of sex. But when I think of hookup culture, what I think about is the ways in which there's a lot of defense against vulnerability, against authenticity, against showing up. Lots of ways of hiding out, and a lot of fear that sort of where we have to act like loving and being loved is just like no big deal. We have to act chill and no drama. So I feel like I spend a lot of time inviting young people to be drama, to allow themselves to feel all of what love is designed to evoke in us.
Mm. Well, let's stay with this if we might. We launched right in, but
yeah,
reaching that particular population. So, I remember my kids in college, my two boys in college, complaining that it was hard to find people who wanted a deep relationship. One son's straight, one son's gay, and they both said that the hookup culture was eating. That the idea at that age of wanting an intimate relationship was sometimes seen as kind of square and hard to find anybody who was interested in it anymore. Is there any truth to that?
I definitely see that, and I hear that, and it's across the board. I have lots of young men who show up in my office, straight young men and gay ones too, but straight young men who come in complaining specifically about having a hard time finding women who are willing to partner. And I think there's a lot of my population is skewed, right? Northwestern University, these are people who've been told since they were like knee high that they're extraordinary, and they are extraordinary. And many of their family systems have really prioritized achievement, academic, economic, professional achievement over love. And so there ends up being this dichotomy. Am I somebody who wants to succeed in the world or succeed in love? And I think especially the women feel that sense of split, of some shame around wanting to be in intimate partnership and a pressure to do amazing things. And it's just, in some ways, it's inconvenient, right? It's inconvenient to be 20-something and in a deep relationship because there's so much geographic mobility and need to pursue, interest in pursuing education, advanced education, job opportunities. So, I mean, I get it.
So you're saying that it's about their age and their priorities, and that intimacy is just not a priority. Finding themselves, growing, achieving, that's the priority in your population anyway, upper middle class, educated.
At least there's a conflict about it. And there tends to be potentially some shame around the part of them that is curious about intimacy, because that part they've been told a story that part is weak or needy or a threat to achievement.
Where are they getting that story from? Do you have any idea? You don't have to have. But
I mean, I think some of it comes from family. I think there are ways that this message comes down the family system. Sometimes it is your number one job is education. But sometimes it is from a parent who has been deeply wounded by love, who then says men are shit or don't trust or you're going to get your heart broken. So sometimes it is like a passing on of wounds that makes loving and being loved feel really frightening.
Of course, where I go with it is the broad cultural moment. It's patriarchy to me, embodied in these young people, specifically. Achievement is coded as masculine, intimacy is coded as feminine. The masculine is exalted, the feminine is devalued, and if you associate with those needs, you feel shame, you feel one down. Does that resonate with you?
100%. It makes me think of a young college student who was in my office hours, and she was deeply in love with this guy. And he was heading off to New Zealand after graduation, and she didn't have a really clear plan yet. and she comes to my office hours. And I feel like if you come to my office hours to present me with a dilemma of love versus achievement, you know darn well where I'm going to go. I'm like, go for the love, like follow the love. So in some ways, I suspect she knew where I was going to go with it. But what I really heard was the shame she felt around her desire to follow this man, you know, to the other side of the world and just see what happens. There was a shame that if I go to New Zealand because he's going to New Zealand, I have just become my mother, my grandmother, the thing that patriarchy holds in contempt.
In contempt. You know, one of the things I say at this broad level is that under patriarchy, you can either be powerful or you can be connected, but you can't be both at the same time. So the connected, affiliative feminine is devalued, and the powerful, independent masculine is valued, and we see that there. And one of the things I think about young people, Americans anyway, is they have to get loaded in order to be able to relate to each other to begin with. I see the rampant drinking amongst that population as a direct consequence of their discomfort with being in relationship, being simply intimate.
Yeah. I will say that a really good gut check is if you need alcohol to do that thing, it is your body telling you aren't ready to do that thing. You aren't ready. The relationship isn't ripe enough. Your own sort of groundedness in your sexuality isn't there yet. That is just a really big red flag. And of course, on a college campus, it's tricky because binge drinking, you know, what they would call blackout, is sort of normalized and normative. And that's what, I went to college in the 90s, and we use the term hooking up, and, you know, we drank on campus, obviously, and in your generation, you know, that's not a new thing, but I think what's new is what the data shows. It's not that drinking is more pervasive, it's binge drinking is more common, like how normative it is to be drunk to the point that you're not going to remember the next day. And so that pairing of that level of alcohol use and sexuality is just, it's just really unfortunate, right? Like I think about how that makes a template for almost like a dissociative experience, right? Versus like a sense of presence and mindfulness.
Well, to say, I mean, you know, I'm a dad, I have to be a dad. I mean, the vulnerability of particularly women in that circumstance to being taken advantage of or assaulted is great.
Right.
So, so that's very interesting to me. So the hookup culture is masculine. It's like guys having sex with each other. You know, it's kind of like the stereotype of gay guys back in the 80s. No vulnerability.
Right. Yeah. And I've heard women say, like, they have a sense of pride that I can have sex like a guy. Like I can be like a guy. I can detach my feelings. As if that's the way that's elevated. And to catch feelings is to somehow have been doing it wrong. Whenever you make that right wrong, and that's what it really does feel like, is sort of a right wrong. There's a right way and a wrong way. And the wrong way is with emotion, with meaning, with vulnerability, with authenticity, with care.
Dependency, that's really out of bounds. Well, okay, that's great. So throughout the conversations with you about dating, the theme that emerges for me listening to you, and I just would like you to speak first generally and then drill down, is the theme of self-care while you're exploring dating and while you're exploring your own sexuality. Do you want to just say something about that generally, or?
Well, I mean, I think just what you've done by just naming the importance of self-care is a really vital first step. And I think this is very important for therapists to keep in mind. I don't know if there's another population that's as inundated with rules, strategies, do's and don'ts as the population of people who are dating. And so that's the stew. You look
on that one, of all ages, on that one, young and old.
Yes, I agree. No, I agree. This is This is definitely it doesn't matter if you're 22 and dating or 45 and dating. I think there's just so much sense of strategy and doing it right, and a very like external idea. And I think there are ways that clinicians may be inadvertently reinforcing this idea of, well, you shouldn't, have sex until this point, or you shouldn't, like ways in which therapists are well-intentioned, but maybe reinforcing this idea that there are right ways and wrong ways to do it, versus helping the person in the dating world feel into like, where are my boundaries? Like, what does caring for myself look like? What do I need in order to feel safe, grounded, connected, open, optimistic, or at least curious? What does that look like for me? Versus this idea of there's some set of rules I have to follow in order to get it right or to get somebody to like me.
And do you think the rules differ by gender, or do you think they're pretty across the board?
Right. We know, the research shows that nowhere do gender role norms play out more strictly than around love and sex and romance, right? So I think especially around that like entry into a relationship, like dating, I think it's really intensely heteronormatively gendered. So especially, I think our LGBT clients have a bit more flexibility, right? They have a bit more agility and freedom around lead, follow. But if you are straight, it's very clear who leads and who follows. And so to be a man in the dating world is to have an intense pressure to lead, to say, we're going here, we're doing this, and to be a woman is to be only able to exert power indirectly and to only have the power of no, versus like the power of initiation and co-creation. So yeah, I think the gender norms get really kind of paralyzing around dating and who's allowed to ask for what at what point.
So I have a true story. Okay. A young man, I'll call him Kevin, from South Dakota, farmer's son, very smart. He goes from South Dakota farm to Harvard, and he can't get a second date. And so I say to him, what do you do on your first date? He says, I'm great on my first date. I tell them I've done this and I've accomplished that and that I'm good for this and I got that award. And I said, listen, Kevin. He goes, what? I go, that second date, probably you want to let her talk a little and maybe ask about her. And you know what he said? He was so adorable. He said, well, gosh, all this time I just figured I had one shot. I better make it good.
Oh, right. He was performing. He was putting a lot of pressure on himself to prove his worthiness in all the wrong ways. Uh-huh. Yeah. It's so ironic, isn't it? Like the thing that probably makes him awesome on a job interview, that he can like bullet point you and explain to you how amazing he is, that very skill, it was sinking him in the dating world.
Yeah, because it wasn't relational.
It wasn't relational.
Yeah. So how to date healthfully? How to date relationally? Do you have, I know that you're off advice, but you have any advice?
I know, right. I know. I mean, it is, I think one of the things that is really intense about dating in this age is that a lot of it happens online. So you could literally be waiting in line at Starbucks for your latte and swiping on potential soulmates. That's really intense. Like that's a bringing together of very different energies, the energy of buying a latte and the energy of looking for somebody to collaborate with, even if you're just only looking for if you're on Tinder and you are very clearly looking only for a sexual partner, that's still, right, you are looking to co-create some serious, juju there. That's serious business. And the fact that we have the ability to swipe and search wherever, whenever, it's pretty novel. And so I try to avoid advice, but I do think it's important to be mindful of how, like, keeping track of what does your body feel as you swipe? You know,
Okay,
is it energized? Go. Yeah.
let's start with that.
Yeah.
You know, I do a spiritual practice, and one of our main attentional practices is feel your arms and legs. Like, where are you this moment? Like, are you here? And that's great advice because it's so deracinating, it's so alienating to be at such an impersonal remove. It's very efficient. I mean, I can see why people do it,
Yeah.
but it's hard to imagine it doesn't trivialize things.
Right. Right. Well, I love that idea. So having maybe even a grounding practice before you take up your phone, open your app, you know, having a special, what we would call in the world of like the world, you might call it like under stimulus control. Like there's only in this setting, right? It's on my back porch, you know, I do a mindfulness practice and then I swipe and I do it for 30 minutes and that's it. Because what I've learned is if I'm on there for an hour, 2 hours, I start feeling anxious. I can't feel my arms and legs. So kind of learning how to ground before and then how to exit out of and have it really kind of a boundaried part of your day.
Mm-hmm. And is dating ultimately, I guess, beyond hookup culture, which is pretty limited to an age group, I think. Mm-hmm. You don't have 50-year-olds on Tinder as a rule. But once we move into dating, is dating still what it used to be? I mean, the way I've always conceived of dating is it's kind of a protracted audition. Has it changed?
I don't know that I think the central questions are the same, which is, do I like you? Do I like me? And what's the potential here? I think those are sort of human questions. I think what's so intense, it seems, is just the sheer volume of possibility. And so the ability to kind of like ruminate, well, you know, person A has these qualities I like, but I don't like this. But person B, you know, kind of just that like fine-grained obsession that maybe we wouldn't have had a generation or two ago because we didn't have the illusion that we can go back to this infinite pool of possibility and try again. Because maybe my soulmate, maybe I just haven't looked hard enough for my soulmate. And so we end up having this kind of like commodified view of relationship versus a relational view of relationship. That it's less about finding the right person and more about, is this particular story interesting? Like, is this a story I want to become part of? A more relational frame.
That transition, one of the things that I focus on with dating people in the early stage relationships, I say, don't pay attention to the person. Pay attention to the way the person treats you.
I love it. Mm-hmm.
Because they may be a great guy or a great gal with everybody else and be a shit to you.
Right.
They're intimate. And I know that when you're young, when you're romantic, and older romantics do the same thing. Love addicts, of course, do nothing but this. To decontextualize the person and just go full bore. But yeah, it's about putting the person in the context of, well, how are you in our relationship? Not how are you as a human being? How are you with me? And I love what you said. Do I like me? Do I like me when I'm with you?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I love that question. I think it is, well, as you're saying, it's so easy to get focused on the other person and kind of lining them up on some set of check marks versus what do I want and how are we, like, what's the space between us feeling like how does that space feel? And that's an important shift from that kind of like myopic view to a systemic view, right? Of the two of us are creating a dance together. And how's that dance feeling? And how is the flow of give and take between us versus getting really focused on them? Or the other thing people do is they get really focused on how am I being perceived? Do you like me?
Oh yeah.
And that's exhausting, and that's very self-abandoning. It's a different kind of, self-abandoning, of sort of like, am I good enough for this person? Is another way of blocking the view that's more systemic, more relational.
Yeah. And in my generation, baby boomers, a person who is primarily concerned with how am I being perceived by you? Am I good enough for you? We would say that's likely a woman. But how is that with younger people? Is it more mixed up?
It's a great question. I guess I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. To me, you're right. I do think it's a question, it's a disempowered kind of question. It may be a question that would be easier for a woman to articulate. Like if we were sitting one-on-one with a female client, it may be a bit easier for her to get in touch with that, right? He may have a few more layers of bravado to
Defense, yeah.
think through.
Yeah, but I think about Kevin. I think these boys are vulnerable too. They're just at even further remove from acknowledging it to themselves.
Right. Right.
Do you see current cultural forces as making intimate relationships more difficult? Or do you think that's an older person saying, oh, God, we're going to the dogs?
I think the craving is there, the yearning is there. I think I have some. I mean, I'm Gen, really squarely in Gen X. I don't know. I am impressed by the young people I get to know and how much they have an intuitive sense of what they want, but a fear that they're the only one who wants that. Like that's a sense of like, I want deeper connection. I'm ready to open. I'm ready to go there, but I don't think anybody else is. And so I think that ends up being that maybe what we've done in the age of social media and pornography has just kind of made it seem like everybody else has it figured out. And it's easier to feel like I'm the only one who wants something different, something deeper.